On the planet Medusa 4, there's an absolutely thriving civilization. Main reason? Trade routes go right through this sector. They just happen to luck out and be just the right place for most of the homeworlds to pass through the area, which means there's a lot of trade, a lot of wealth, a lot of prosperity, and with it, people that want to take advantage of it. And because of that, crime began to move in. At first, they could handle it. It was just petty stuff. But those in charge, the goddamn, they were not very good at holding off these. Especially when the queen of the entire system had a sudden heart attack and died without a successor. Because of that, the noble houses took over, and as we all know, noble houses are excessively corrupt, trying to use things like guilds and ultra regulations and the insane high taxes drove everybody to fight against them and push towards anything else that was possible. What they got was the Mafia. The intergalactic mafias moved in and started taking over, forcing all the noble houses to basically give up any power they have. They're just trophies now. They're just talking heads. They're just there to make people think there's some semblance of their own order still there. But there isn't. And what happened after the mafia was the gangs. The individual mafias broke apart because the gang warfare started tearing them apart. As organized as the mafia was, you can't fight a war on that many fronts. When 6, 7, 8, a dozen gangs are tearing your people apart daily, well, you don't stick around for very long. The little bit of law enforcement that's still there is barely able to keep the massive cities and spaceports from falling completely apart. Yet they're still token forces. They do try to do their job. Emphasis on try, because any of the new recruits that try to do their job and try to do it well find out very quickly that they have absolutely no help from their chain of command. And though they still try to do the right thing to justify their salary, they are barely able to keep some semblance together. The citizens on the planet once lived in absolute decadence with all the wealth coming in. And with all the wealth was a whole bunch of freedoms as well. They could dress the way they wanted. Many species, for a long time, did not wear any clothing. Many of them would simply eat whatever they want, drank whatever they want, as long as they weren't stepping out into the transport lanes or breaking anything, and if they did, they paid for it, then everything was fine. Now, the local population, male and female, covers themselves in layers and layers of fabric, not just for protection, even though the nanofibers inside do, but also to keep their own weapons hidden, making sure that if someone tries to take them down, they would be able to defend themselves. And many of the females now cannot even show their faces. It didn't matter what species, insectoid, amphibian, reptilian, mammalian, it didn't matter. If they looked even slightly attractive, they were suddenly a target, and they did not want that type of target on their ass. Everyone knew also, if they saw a gang member, never, ever look them in the eyes. This would be seen as a challenge, and you would face their wrath. Not only that, but if you dared fight against one, they would call out to their gangs in whatever language it might be, and before you had a chance to do anything, their compatriot would come out of the woodwork like fucking cockroaches. And then you would simply be swarmed, beaten down, and if you're lucky, you'd make it to some sort of hospital or aid station. Though there was a lot of wealth, everyone now lived in squalor, especially in comparison to what they used to. Everyone worried about this. How could they live? How could they raise their children, especially with all the kidnappings and all the assaults going on? They hoped that things would calm down, and for a little while things were okay, but they just slowly got worse. Amidst this, a new species was discovered. It took a while before they started migrating towards the galactic center, but eventually they came in for work. This backwater species of mammalians was strange. Everyone heard about them, but they were mammalian, but they had very, very little fur. Many of them insisted on removing all their fur as well, which was surprising. One such human came in named Paul. Paul came in to find work. Nothing serious. He wasn't trying to cause trouble, but he wanted to find work away from his homeworld for one reason or another. When he arrived, he was being extremely friendly, courteous, and helpful to everyone around them. This actually surprised many of them. Not only were they surprised to see something so odd as a human, but they were also surprised at how polite this one was. Through the universal translator, they knew that this one was speaking in very delicate tones, always using the proper phrases and correct words. It wasn't ever mixing any words either. It was odd to them all. What was this thing? After moving into what's known as a multi-domicile building, the human called an apartment, he made a point to go around to the floor and introduce himself to all the neighbors, all the different families that were there, making sure for each of them he brought a small token, a gift, not truly a tribute. When one called it that, he immediately withdrawed it and said, "Please don't ever say that. It's a gift. Tributes are demanded. This I'm willingly giving you." This confused everyone, but they did take the small gift that was there. He then offered all on the floor to come to a gathering that the human called a party. Most were extremely hesitant because they didn't understand this human. What was this party? They knew it was a gathering of sorts, but they weren't sure what to do. What was the conditions? What was the protocol for something like this? Did they have to bring something as well? To their surprise, Paul simply said, "Nah, just bring yourself. Bring everybody you want, as long as they're close friends of yours. But this is mainly for the people on this floor." Everyone looked at each other confused each time, but they agreed to be there. During the party, Paul surprised everybody as he had games for the children to play. In the next room, he had board games set up, a bunch of different card games with the rules already written out in their own languages. There was plenty of food for everybody, more than they could all eat, which surprised them all. This human must be extremely wealthy to do this. What was going on? Because they haven't had this much food in a while. Along with that, there was beverages of all different types, to include something that the human brought from his own planet called liqueur. However, when he told them it was full of ethyl alcohol, almost every single species backed away, with the exception of two. As the adults were talking, they told Paul about what was going on, how things used to be. They brought up some old images, some old video of how things were. He seemed genuinely surprised to everyone, as his fur on his face seemed to raise up high, and the jaw seemed to open, exposing those strange mandibles that they have. Yet he was full aware of the way everyone was. Looking at everyone, he must have realized that depression was starting to seep into his party, so he did not want that to happen. He continued to make jokes, pour everyone else beverages. As it turns out, something from the human world called coffee has a similar effect to ethyl alcohol has on humans, yet they don't need much. He says he didn't want to drink coffee, he wouldn't want to be up all night, yet for some reason this phrase, he shouldn't have said that. For certain species, up all night has a separate meaning. As the night continued, Paul was actually surprised as more and more of the large drapes that they wore came off. Many of them started to shed their outer protective layer, exposing the extremely sparse set of clothing that was underneath. This surprised him as he at first thought, "Oh, it's going to turn into that kind of party." And then he was informed more about the way the situation is. Paul was confused as he came in with a t-shirt. He was looking everybody in the eye, saying, "Hi, how you doing?" the whole day. Nobody gave him problems, although everyone understood why he wasn't touched yet. The locals did not understand humans at all. And the fact that Paul's musculature was quite large and seemingly very dense, this made most of the gangs back off, realizing they couldn't possibly take him one-on-one, unless they had some caffeinated courage, perhaps. The more Paul heard about the situations outside, the more he seemed to not want to listen, but was always intent on it. Eventually, he said, "I don't like bullies." The look in his eyes seemed to scare everyone for just a slight moment. They asked him, "Why would you not try to get along with the gangs? At least that will help you get through your entire work schedule without being harassed." He simply stated, "How do you get along with somebody who just wants to hurt you?" Seriously, no, it doesn't pass the sniff test. The translator had some difficulty with this, and almost everybody ended up rolling their multiple eyes at the comment. Yet, they moved on, and eventually the party wound down over time. They went in to check the kids, and the kids were so exhausted at this point, most of them were simply curled up somewhere or crawling on the ceiling, just hanging there sleeping. The parents finally took their kids and went home. However, two females stayed, basically because they were so absolutely intoxicated from what they'd been consuming, neither of them were able to actually travel. Yet all they had to do was get down the hallway. One who was so absolutely hammered that she was passed out on the couch, no one touched. At first, Paul grabbed a blanket and tried to bring it on. Yet Zana decided to let them know that you don't do that. Not for her species. No, don't cover her. Paul was confused, but again, he was learning the different species and just kind of let it go. He and Zana, however, went into the other room and were actually surprised they didn't wake up their completely intoxicated visitor. The next day, that same intoxicated visitor, as she was coming back from her employment, was attacked by several males thrown against the side of the street. In full view of everyone, they began to tear at her garments for some reason, but when they did, they saw a strange marking. In their own language, they saw something written right across, just below where the clavicle would be. Property of human. They stopped for a moment. They checked to see if it would wipe off, but no, this was written in. They thought for a moment that this was actually tattooed into her carapace. Then they let her go out of concern, and she scurried away as fast as possible. They know there are certain rules. You cannot just assault someone's slave. So they decided they would have to deal with the human. They'd have to either convince him to sell her or end him and take her. The human found out about this as she ran in and confronted him. Jana decided to let him know exactly what was going on and was actually surprised that a prank that they had played on her, well, that was something that had actually saved her. Later on, after the human found out, 4 different males of 4 different species confronted him right outside the apartment building. They all tried to get in his face, but they worried. They knew they had the numerical advantage, but these humans, they're quite broad, and they're kind of tall. Compared to the tallest one of these males that was trying to go into his face, Paul was at least a good 4 inches taller. Not to mention, the tallest one was so damn skinny, he thought, if I sneeze, I'm going to break him. Eventually, the 4 decided that they would try to overpower him and ended up on the ground in severe pain. Those that watched just goes, "Yeah, that's cool, do that," and then just left it go. Many of them wanted to be gone before these 4 woke up, not knowing that they weren't going to wake up. They've been wrecked into the ground and into the walls with such force that by the time the paramedics finally got there wasn't anything that was going to happen. Realizing that the local gang is most likely going to come for retaliation, and when they do, they're going to come in much, much bigger numbers. So Paul made a call and requested an old friend. When he told this to his neighbors, he said, "Don't worry, we'll be able to handle it." They all looked and said, "We?" thinking he meant everyone in that room. He said, "Oh, no, no, no. My friend Wildy is coming." They all looked at each other and didn't understand this. The next day was Paul days off, and he was just going to relax a little bit in his apartment. Yet he suddenly got an alert on his devices saying that something was happening with his ship. He contacted the shipborne AI and asked what was going on. "Someone is attempting to break into the vessel, sir. I suggest you call the authorities and get down here immediately." Very, very quickly, everybody in the same floor saw Paul run down the stairs with such speed that they were actually surprised someone that big could move that fast. When he reached the docks, he saw 6 males attempting to break into his ship. They were having a lot of trouble because when they tried to go in through the entrance, the moment they tried to set a charge, an exterior blast door moved and shut in front of them. They had already tried to blast the door open, but nothing was happening. Right in front of them, he said, "Hey, what's wrong with the ship?" One of them told him to go to hell. The second one said, "We're stealing the ship. What concern is this of you?" "It's my ship," Paul said. The two stopped, looked at each other, pulled out a couple bludgeons and says, "Okay, now you're going to die." With that, Paul pulled a .45 caliber revolver from his back. 1 shot, 1 kill, 1 bullet, 1 torso. All 6 were down. The 2 in front of him and the 4 that came over to see what the hell just happened. He was sitting there reloading as he left, leaving the bodies to rot. Let someone else find them. When security showed up, they had never seen wounds like this before. They were confused. What the hell did this? When they started looking, they found hunks of metal in a few of them. Some of them, the hunks of metal had actually gone clean through, blowing carapaces apart, tearing flesh, blowing organs to pieces. Some of the organs weren't even there anymore, and in one case, the head was just gone. They looked, they couldn't find any plasma scoring, no laser burns, no lacerations from claws or fangs or tentacles or anything. What the hell did this? Did somebody just show up and, I don't know, what did they just explode? They weren't sure what the hell was going on, so they couldn't really do anything about it. Yet all they really had to do was check the security recordings. The cameras were still there, yet hidden, but the recordings had already been taken by the gang leader. He knew exactly who had done what, and seeing 6 of his men go down with barely a wave of one arm, he realized he needed to bring big numbers. So he called everyone he could to rally as many as he could. As he did this, Paul was in his own apartment with a whole bunch there. Not only the families who were worried about what was going to happen, but his lover, and of course the one who was saved by the indelible ink that is still on her carapace. Unfortunately for her, it's still going to be there until she molts in about a year and a half. He gets a call on the communicator and immediately hears how he has a package. He turns to everybody and says, "Wildy's here." Later on, he shows them the 475 Wildy Magnum, one that has been juiced up over time as this has been passed down from father to son for several generations. One of the neighbors looks and says, "That is far too primitive to be effective. I don't know why you would need something so primitive. You might as well throw a rock." Paul looked and said, "This throws rocks. This throws rocks very well. It also makes one hell of a mess. So do me a favor. When things go down, stay in your apartments. I do not want to get in anyone's way. Best thing, either get down low on the floor or climb on the ceiling. Whatever suits you best. But the best actually would be, don't be here." Later on that day, the gangs rallied outside the apartment building. They rushed in, aiming for the 7th floor where Paul was going to be. They set charges on the hatchway door, and as soon as it blew, it rushed in. Once they rushed in a large group, a secondary door came down and closed. Everyone was confused. There shouldn't be a secondary door here. What the hell? From the inside, shots were being heard. Several loud blasts coming in. There was also screams of terror and pain. The wolves outside rushed to blow the second door. When they finally got charges up, they blew the door and rushed in, only to get shot out the door with a huge blast. In a row, several of those invaders had fallen apart, parts ripped off or completely blown in half. Several of these shots happened, making everyone else wait in the hallway. They all waited to ambush, but then they saw something rolling out. A small metal cylinder rolling forward. They were confused. What the hell was that? Suddenly, a shot rang out. Seemingly something flew out of nowhere and hit it, and it exploded in a chemical burst. Many of the thugs outside were coughing and gagging as the chemicals burned their eyes, burned their throats, got into their abdomen air holes, and just started burning them from the inside out. Many of them were on the ground vomiting and wouldn't know what was coming. Stepping through the door with a towel wrapped around his face that had already been soaked in water, he started blasting those on the ground. Many of those not fully affected tried to get away as fast as possible. 2 eventually did get away. The rest ended up with missing parts. Very important parts, from hearts to lungs to brains. They were all done. Each of them unceremoniously thrown down the hallway as their bodies clambered down the sides of the stairs, all the way until a giant splat on the first floor. Each splat almost cathartic with each body that lands. Seeing how many there were, Paul made another call. The neighbors were shocked at the mess, the destruction, the absolute carnage that was going on. As they turned the corner, his lover heard him say, "Wildy is lonely and needs his friends." That was all he said before stopping the communication. Then he turned to his lover, looked her up and down as she was slightly shaking, yet her body was exposed at that point. Her species, a aquatic or semi-aquatic, similar to if dolphins could walk out of the water, was looking at him. With her species, they didn't actually wear any clothing, and her curves definitely made Paul turn and smirk. Right before saying, "You mind if I stay in your place?" She paused for a second before saying, "As long as you bring that gun." 2 planetary rotations later, Wildy's friends are here, and they knew they were going to need him. The gang was maybe another planetary rotation out before they tried to take down the entire neighborhood. They called in every single person they could. This was even worse than when they tried to raid his apartment. This time, they were going to try and take down the entire neighborhood, tearing into shops, destroying transports, assaulting anyone that comes in. The men were beaten down, broken, and eventually killed. The women were beaten down and assaulted. There was no getting away. The best anyone could do was hide and hope. Hope that something happens. Yet, here came Paul, and what he was carrying was a very ancient weapon. A 240 heavy machine gun with all the belts leading back to a backpack. Everybody was confused. What the hell? And then he squeezed the trigger. The full automatic fire was cutting through the Xenos like nothing, like a hot knife through hot butter. Many of the gang members tried desperately to take him down, but let's face it, trying to take down a human with a machine gun is like trying to take down a human with a machine gun. As soon as they realized they couldn't just bum rush him, they turned around to run. But again, running from a human with a machine gun is like running from a human with a machine gun. It didn't work out. Everybody who watched the carnage as Paul ran down the street, raising the weapon up and firing bursts into any of the gang members he saw, those trying to steal, those trying to murder, those trying to assault. He made special attempts to aim for certain areas when he saw that, but all the rest, he just cut them into pieces. The speed in which he moved scared the living crap out of everyone else. The strength he showed as one of the Xenos jumped out at him, trying to swing down with one of their arm blades. Paul just turned, reached up with a hand, grabbed him by the throat, held him straight out just far enough where those arm blades could not reach him, and then crushed his larynx right there, and then dropping the body on the ground. The gang tried desperately to take him down. Energy weapons, sonic pulse weapons, natural weapons like the arm blades. They didn't work. They just seemed to piss him off as he ran through the streets, taking all those out with him. But he didn't run randomly. No, he had a destination. Paul had found out where the gang leader stays, and he was going to go there and give this guy a hard goodbye. The gang leader panicked completely when he realized that a human with a machine gun was on his way, and he looks pissed. With that, the gang leader tries to leave, but the moment they bring up a transport, Paul turns the corner, sees the transport with the gang members, and not only perforates the transport, but turns everyone else into a pile of chunky salsa. The subordinates try to set up an ambush inside the buildings, and as they do, they were absolutely shocked. Shots are coming from another direction. What the hell? Wasn't Paul out there? Everyone looked, and sure enough, Paul's still taking Xenos down left and right. Why are we hearing shots from different angles? What's going on? They try to run to the different portals, trying to see where in the hell these are coming from, and then realize humans, other humans, are pushing in, and they're coming in very, very hot. Immediately, they go in, and the humans run forward and bash into the door with the side of their bodies, almost ripping the metal door clean out of the portal itself. They then back up again, do it again, but this time harder, and sure enough, the portal gives way, the metal door ripping the frame clean off as it hits the ground. You would think that they would be completely harmless at this point, but before they could even fire on the humans on the ground, another human would step over them and fill the entire area with brass, lead, and burnt carbon. As they finally reached the top, the gang leader surrendered like the coward he was, saying that he could pay them, he could give them anything, drugs, women, whatever the hell they wanted. Paul didn't give a shit. He reached up, grabbed the gang leader by the antennae, and dragged him very low and very deliberately. To this species, that would be like grabbing somebody by just their testiculars and dragging them out the door, using their own body weight to make it extremely painful. The gang leader looked around. He couldn't understand how it didn't work. How did this human get in? It still confused him, but he was there. How did this not stop him? Then he looked around and realized there was other humans. Other humans with all sorts of weapons. One of the humans says, "It's always nice to have your friends show up with lots of guns, doesn't it?" And the humans all started to give this strange coughing sound. The gang leader realized suddenly that they were laughing at him. His pride, his ego wouldn't allow this. He immediately reached up, tried to stab one of them with his arm blades, and another human stepped on his tail, stopping him cold. And as he landed, a third human kicked him so hard in the torso that the internal carapace cracked. Paul looked down and said, "If you're gonna hunt humans, you should have remembered we travel in packs." That was the last thing the gang leader heard as Paul put a burst right through his head, making the head explode. The humans all kind of looked at each other at that point. Said, "Mission's complete. I'll buy you guys a beer next time I see you." "Alright, see you later. I got my family waiting." And they just nonchalantly left. Everyone who was close enough to hear them talk was just completely dumbfounded. After the battle, the constables came back after completely losing their balls and hiding from all the violence. They refused to arrest the humans, more out of fear than anything else, but it seems as though the humans, all they did was want to go back home, put their weapons away. Paul tells his buddies, all his neighbors, and all the families that, hey, it's fine now. You won't have any more problems with the gangs. They were absolutely shocked at this, but then again, they could still smell fresh carbon and a lot of blood all over him. As he went into his lover's apartment, she was standing there, waiting for him. She was surprised to see him. How did he get back in one piece, she thought. But then something else came to mind. She thought about a man. He's so strong. He's so fast. And right now he's fresh from his fight. With that, she ran past him before she hugged him and immediately closed the door. From there, screams came from the residents, but they weren't screams of pain at all. Many of the residents at that point were woke up 3 or 4 times just to say the word again, followed usually by, "Are you shitting me?" It didn't take long after that for life on Medusa to go back to the way it was before all this crap happened, before the nobles decided to suck at their job, before the Mafia moved in, before these gangs made it impossible to do anything. Everyone was just grateful to the humans and tried to thank them, many times trying to give them gifts, but many of the humans would deny it. Just hang out with us every once in a while. That's all you gotta do. Everyone was surprised. They found out that humans are actually social creatures, but they're also extremely, extremely territorial. As those on Medusa talked about what happened, they came to one true realization. When they were totally getting overrun by gangs, by the criminals that basically ran the streets, what they needed was not some corrupt garbage of constables coming in and imposing their will, making it worse for everyone else. What they needed at that point was a hero. But what they got was human.